Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jeannie Allen, and I'm the president of the Center for Education Reform located here in Washington, D.C. And it's my honor to... Thank you. Thank you. It's my honor to introduce the last speaker of this great event. CER works to create opportunities for and challenges obstacles to better education for all children by challenging the education establishment, boldly promoting and advocating for choice and accountability at all levels. And it's been a pleasure working alongside Governor Bush and his fantastic team for many years. And I just want to pause right now and thank them again for leading us across the partisan divide to make education great for all children in this country. Thank you, Governor Bush. Another individual who's worked hard to cross that same partisan divide that often holds us back from progress is the current Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan. Being Secretary of Education is no easy task. The public vacillates between holding him responsible for what happens in every school down to the classroom to wanting him far, far away. Despite ambitious programs and loyal staff, he also must contend with hundreds of branch and division level managers that have been working behind the scenes for 10, 20, and 30 years, sometimes waiting for things just to return back to normal. Thus, the wheels of bureaucracy move very slowly, no matter who's at the helm, and the key for the secretary is to figure out the ways to move them despite the rusty parts of the wheel. Then there are the outside voices, the media, the partisans in both parties, the organizations, like ours, who push and prod, go faster, better, stronger, switch gears, take no prisoners, some of us say. And despite the ongoing cacophony of voices, this secretary truly remains focused and demonstrates a respect and a joy in hearing and responding to all of those concerns. They say that a measure of a person are the people around whom one surrounds himself. And when it comes to his professional life, the people who work with Arne Duncan are a testament to his integrity. They have many different voices and they have many different views. Many of us know them and work with them on a regular basis. They don't walk in lockstep, which is a huge, huge plus in Washington, where the average cabinet secretary tends to seek acquiescence, not independence. These accolades don't make the secretary right on everything, but they do make him a unique representative of the most singularly important issue we face today in our country, for which we are truly grateful for your service. The father of 2 young children, Arne Duncan is the 9th Secretary of Education. He served as CEO of what one of his predecessors called the worst school district in the country, a comment that reverberates to this day when stories are written about the Windy City. Duncan did much to pull Chicago from that infamy, setting him up for his next shot in his career. Reached for comment this week, that predecessor, Bill Bennett, the 3rd ever to serve in this post, had this to say about Secretary Duncan. Bill said, "I don't know if he wants this quote circulated or not, but I've long thought Arne to be the ideal Secretary of Education for a Democratic administration. He is serious, he is smart, and he knows how and when to shake up what both needs to be shaken and stirred. He also knows how to keep his elbows in the right place on a basketball court." Bill said, "I've worked with him, appeared with him, and can honestly say I think he's not only the best thing about an administration I did not vote for, but the best thing that happened to the Department of Education in quite some time." Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Honorable Arne Duncan.
Thank you so much, Jean. Thank you for that kind introduction. I think my mother may have written that, so I apologize for that. I'm going to keep my remarks pretty brief. This is an extraordinary group, and I really look forward to having a great conversation. I'd love to have some good time to go back and forth a little bit and get your feedback and pick your brain on some things. So keep this short and be ready to ask any questions you might have. I don't have to spend a lot of time on the challenges that we all face. I think folks here are pretty familiar with them. Just sort of try and capsulize it in 3 quick facts. First, if you look on all the international comparisons and in obviously a globally competitive international marketplace, we have to not look at our districts or even our states in the country, but internationally. By any of the PISA results, our young people today are somewhere 21st, 23rd, 25th in math and science, nowhere near where we need it to be. If you look at our high school graduation rates, As a country, we lose almost 1 million young people each year from our schools to our streets. As I visit every governor, I always ask them how many 9th graders you have and how many 12th graders you have. And you see these tremendous loss in numbers. I've met with a few who told me all their 10th through 12th graders are moving to other states. And as funny as that is, it's actually very scary because I've yet to find those states. We are losing children, and those children without a high school diploma are basically condemned to poverty and social failure. There are no good jobs out there today. There are basically no good jobs if you just have a high school diploma. Some form of higher education has to be the goal beyond that. And then finally, we used to lead the world in college graduates. And in one generation, we've stagnated, we've flatlined, and 9 other countries have passed us by. So one generation, we've gone from 1st to 9th. So if you look at any of those things, whether it's international benchmarks of 14 and 15-year-olds, whether you look at dropout rates, whether you look at college graduation rates, if we believe that we have to educate our way to a better economy, the status quo today simply isn't good enough. And it's not just our children's future, it's our country's future that's at stake here. So President Obama has drawn a line in the sand. He said by 2020, we have to again lead the world in college graduates. And if we do that, I think America's strength in the world will go to an entirely different level. So that's the moonshot. That's every strategy we're putting in place is towards that end. And to get there, it's an ambitious goal. We need basically a 50% increase in college graduation. To do that, you have to look early childhood, you have to look K-12 reform, you have to look higher ed, you have to look at this cradle to career continuum. But the challenge, I think, for all of us in this room, and this is why you're here, is I think all of you share the same sense of urgency that I have. That for far too many young people around the country today, we're not giving them the world-class education they desperately need and deserve. And so the challenge for us is how do we harness that passion? How do we work together as fast and as smart as we can to give every child that chance they desperately need? I will tell you in the past, whatever it is, 19, 20, 21 months, whatever it may be, the amount of change that we've seen around the country has been simply extraordinary. We've had a history here in this country of 50 states setting their own standards, 50 different goalposts, many of them dummied down due to political pressure, not due to what was right for education or right for children, right for the state's economy, but to make politicians look good. This was theoretically the third rail in education. You couldn't talk about it. But governors, state school chief officers, PTA, nonprofits, the heads of both major unions came together and said this isn't working. And in a short amount of time today, we've had 40 states not talk about higher standards, not just debate it, but actually adopt them. This is a sea change. And that leadership is not coming from me. That leadership is not coming from anyone in Washington. That's coming at the state level. State legislators, governors, give yourselves a round of applause. State chief school officers working together to do the right thing for children. And I can't tell you how important that is and what a game changer that is. As we move forward, for the first time in our country, children in Massachusetts and children in Mississippi are going to be measured with the same yardstick. And the goal is going to be to have every single child graduating from high school, college, and career ready. We again talked about the dropout rate being far too high. We have, depending on the state and depending on the institution of higher education, as many as half our young people who actually do get to college have to take remedial classes. They're not ready. We spend billions of dollars a year on remedial education. And so we have to stop lying to children and families. We have to raise the bar, and all of that leadership is being provided at the state level. Secondly, once you have higher standards, what do you need behind it? You need better assessments. And what we have now is 2 consortium of states working together, 44 states, to come up with that next generation of assessments. We have to move beyond simplistic fill-in-the-bubble tests. We have to measure complex thinking skills. We have to give our teachers more real-time data, not end-of-the-year assessments when that child's already moved on to the next teacher, but 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times during the year, teachers are figuring out what students are learning what, so they can differentiate instructions, they can put students in small groups. The goal is not what are our teachers teaching, the goal is what are our students learning, and how do we give the teachers the information to know what students are actually comprehending, and giving them, the teachers, the students themselves, very importantly, and their parents, real-time information. This is your strengths. These are your weaknesses. This is where you have to continue to get better. See change happening there. We were very worried that as folks raised standards due to the tough economic times, folks wouldn't come with better assessments. So thanks to the Race to Top resources, $350 million to invest, again, not in our assessments, not in national, federal assessments, but in great leadership at the state level. And we think as that moves forward over the next couple of years, again, it's just an absolute game changer. I've learned a lot coming to Washington. One thing I had no idea upon getting here is that we had states with laws on the books, actual laws that prohibited the linking of student achievement and teacher evaluation. Absolutely staggering. Small step, but an important victory. All those laws are gone, eliminated. And I was talking with a new governor of Nevada a little bit earlier. Nevada is one of those states, a couple others there. And it's one barrier, but I think a very important symbolic victory that is teaching. Does good teaching matter? Is great teaching hugely important? Absolutely. And we have to create a system that really strengthens and elevates the profession. And part of that is really understanding the great work that teachers do and how much they're impacting student achievement. We have to think very differently about rewarding excellence in education. And I've said repeatedly, as a country, we've been scared to talk about excellence. We talk about excellence in every other field, whether it's business, whether it's sports, music, entertainment, you name it. Somehow we've treated education as like interchangeable widgets, that teachers, principals didn't matter. We have across the country extraordinary teachers, we have extraordinary principals, we have great school districts, we have great states, and no one can tell you who's better than the other. I've talked a lot about the state of California that has 300,000 teachers in California. The top 10%, the top 30,000 teachers in California would arguably be among the best in the world, absolutely world class. The bottom 10% in California, the bottom 30,000, probably shouldn't be teaching, should probably be doing something else. And no one in California can tell you who's in that top 30,000 and who's in the bottom. And so as a country, we're starting to move to recognize the extraordinary difference that great teachers make, that great principals make. We have to continue to reward excellence. We have to be thoughtful about it. We have to be inclusive in it. We have to have those hard conversations together. But through our Teacher Incentive Fund, we put out over $400 million recently to districts around the country who are experimenting with different ways to reward excellence. And great teachers are looking for this. The last thing a great teacher wants is to teach next door to a teacher who's not getting the job done. I honestly don't think we can pay great teachers or great principals enough money. Pick a dollar, $100,000, $125,000, $150,000. I don't think we can do enough to reward excellence. And how we identify quality, how we support that quality, how we shine a spotlight, how we learn from it, and how we ultimately make the teaching profession one where folks can do well much earlier on in life. We have new teacher contracts in places like right here in DC, in Baltimore recently, where if you're a fantastic 27, 28, 29-year-old teacher, you can make $100,000. And as I go out and talk to a bunch of universities around here and talk to young people about that, you can see their eyes light up. That's a profession they want to go into. They want to be rewarded. And we want to bring in those people of an entirely different caliber as we have a baby boomer generation moving towards retirement. So thinking about excellence, thinking about how we identify it, how we reward it, how we recognize it, how we learn from it is a huge movement our country's starting to get into. It starts with linking student achievement and teacher evaluation, but has to go much beyond that as well. We have to make sure every single child has access to a great, great school. We have 95,000 schools roughly in this country. We have to make sure that where schools aren't working, we deal with that openly and honestly. Where we have high-performing schools, be they charter schools, be they district schools, magnet schools, international baccalaureate curriculum, whatever it might be, we need to replicate those successes. And if we got to a day that we had 95,000 outstanding schools, me and many of you in this room could retire. Our jobs would be done. But we can't rest, we can't wait until we have that great option in every community and that we eliminate those options that aren't working. I always think that in this country, what works for wealthy people often works for poor families as well. In this country for decades, probably for centuries, wealthy folks have had access to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 great options. And poor families have often been relegated to one choice, and often that choice wasn't a very good one. And the more we can empower parents and help them figure out what the best learning environment is for their child, help them understand what their child's strengths and weaknesses are, and give them a menu of great options and let them vote with their feet and figure out where they want to go, I think that will help to create a system of improvement. And then finally, we're trying to challenge the country in a very different way to turn around our nation's underperforming schools. And it's pretty interesting when I talk about this dropout crisis we face. The problem, while the absolute numbers are large, it's relatively self-contained. There are about 2,000 high schools historically that have been quote-unquote dropout factories. And the numbers coming out of there are unfortunately both staggering and tragic. Those 2,000 high schools have produced half of our nation's dropouts and 75% of the dropouts from the minority community, our African American and Latino young men and women. And when you talk about 2,000 versus 95,000, that's a manageable number for this country. What we've done far too often is just turn a blind eye. And whether it was complacency, whether it was some underlying belief that somehow poor children and children of color couldn't learn, whether it was an unwillingness to challenge the status quo, at best, there's been incremental, marginal change in those places. If you look at schools sort of in that last year of school improvement under No Child Left Behind, historically, something like 92% of schools, in terms of their intervention in schools and districts, they picked other. And we know what other was. Other was more the same. And so what we've done is put an unprecedented amount of money behind turning around those chronically underperforming schools. Race to the Top has gotten all the press. That's fine. That's been fantastic. $4 billion for the country. What the public hasn't quite understood is we've put $4 billion behind the bottom 5% of schools. It's a massive, absolutely targeted investment, not in the status quo, but in doing some things very, very differently. If we can do that, if we can, as a country, turn around that bottom 5% over the next couple years, we will transform the opportunity structure for children and communities who have been desperately underserved for so long. I'm very pleased to report that we have over 700 schools this year that are being turned around in about 44 states. Had a fantastic press conference yesterday with General Powell and his wife. That was so interesting that we have so many of these historical dropout factories. They're actually moving off that list, that real improvement is possible. Those 2,000 schools that were dropout factories in 2002, by 2008, 900 of them had been removed. Unfortunately, some other schools came into that category, but anyone who tells you that you can't make progress in a poor community, that you can't make progress with disadvantaged children, simply doesn't understand the facts. We're seeing tremendous movement there. But we have to move with the urgency that we've never seen before. I'll give you one example of a turnaround school that I worked with in Chicago, in the Englewood community on the south side of Chicago, very historical African-American community, great history. But when we decided to turn around that school, about 60% of students were dropping out and 4% were reading at grade level. So we came in, very tough community conversations, talked about the need for dramatic change, very tough community meetings. I remember I left one night, lots of battle, lots of give and take, and went back to my office the next day and got a call from a man named Don Stewart. Some of you may know Don Stewart was a former president of Spelman University, former president of the college board, and at that time, he was the president of the Chicago Community Trust. And he said, Arne, you're not going to believe this, but 50 years ago, my mother wouldn't let me go to Englewood High School because it was such a bad school. And to hear that it's been 5 decades when we allowed that school to languish was absolutely heartbreaking to me. And I wondered over those 50 years how many Don Stewarts we lost because we failed to give them an opportunity. We put in 3 small, innovative schools in there. One of them happened to be an all-boys academy, urban prep. This summer, they had their first graduation. 107 young men, 107 graduated, 107 all going on to 4-year universities. Same poverty, same socioeconomic challenges, unfortunately, same devastating levels of violence in the community, same building, same single-parent families, not enough dads involved, but dramatically different results. We as adults, great teachers, great principals make a huge difference. So there's been tremendous progress. I couldn't be more pleased with where we're at today, but we have so far to go. And again, I just feel this compelling sense of urgency that together, working together, we have to break through. 3 thoughts of where we want to go in the new year, and then open up to any questions you might have. First, we were blessed to have significant new resources come to education through the Recovery Act. And as you guys know, at the state and at the district level, budgets have never been tighter. Huge amounts of resources both to drive reform and to save jobs. But as all of you know, those Recovery Act funds are coming to an end. As we face this funding cliff, we have to have these honest conversations about productivity and efficiency. I know you guys are focused on technology, and Governor, I appreciate your leadership and Governor Weiss's leadership on technology. It's interesting to me that technology has absolutely transformed how we interact together socially. It's transformed how we do business. Technology is yet to transform how we provide education.
I think there's huge opportunities there to work in very different ways during the school day, after school, weekends, 24/7, delivering content in very different ways to young people. And we're seeing examples around the country, school districts that are reducing their summer school costs 50% by using technology and better serving students. And so as we face these tough budget times, we can do the simple stuff like eliminating art and music and cutting days out of the school year, eliminating sports and band. Simple things to do, none of which is good for children. Or we can think about how we become more productive and how we become more efficient using technology, cutting things that aren't making a difference in students' lives. We have to have those conversations, and we're going to continue to look to districts to help lead the way of where we need to go there. Secondly, as we've seen this huge breakthrough in standards and this coming breakthrough in assessments, I think we can have a similar breakthrough in labor management agreements. And we have a series of fascinating new contracts in places from Tampa, Florida, to Baltimore recently, to New Haven, to Pittsburgh, to right here in DC, where you're seeing folks come together in very different ways that take care of children first, but also respect and elevate the profession. And what's been so interesting to me is that you look in these contracts, whether it's in New Haven, where 96% of teachers voted for the contract, whether it's Hillsborough, 95% of teachers voted for it, Baltimore recently, 65% of teachers voted for it, DC, 80% of teachers voted for it. This is what teachers are looking for. And so just as we now have not one or two, but 8, 10, 12 great models, we would like to take that to scale. We see no reason why we shouldn't have 100, 150 districts break through and have these pockets of excellence become the norm. And so we're going to host a labor management conference early in the new year. Want to bring together the superintendents, the chairs of the board, the presidents of the board, and the head of the union from a series of districts around the country and say, are you willing to open up and have these conversations? And can we, not 5 years from now, but over the next 6 or 7 months, make those changes and follow some of these really interesting examples that will reward excellence and make sure great teachers and principals get rewarded and make sure we're not tolerating failure when we don't need to. And we think just as we've seen this radical change, this tidal wave of change around standards assessments, we want to do the same things and have these collective bargaining agreements be part of the solution rather than somehow part of a status quo that isn't working well enough either for children or for adults. And then finally, we want to work in a bipartisan way to reauthorize No Child Left Behind. And we want to maintain the focus on disaggregating data and looking at that achievement gap. And I think as a country, historically, we love to sweep those tough conversations under the rug and not have them. And thanks to No Child Left Behind, that's always going to be front and center as we move forward. But at the same time, we think there are a number of changes that need to be made. I think in many ways, the current law was too punitive. There are many, many ways to fail, but very few rewards for success. It was very prescriptive, top-down from Washington. And I think that has to change. We have to become much more flexible. When I ran the Chicago Public Schools, I had 600 schools. I couldn't begin to micromanage 600 schools. I had to give autonomy, hold folks accountable for results, but really empower principals in areas to do well. If I couldn't micromanage 600 schools, I promise you I can't micromanage 95,000 schools. We have to really empower governors and state school chief officers and local superintendents, have a high bar for them, but give them the room to move. No Child Left Behind led, I think this was absolutely unintentional, but it led to that dumbing down of standards. Many folks lowering the bar in order to try and look good. And it led to a narrowing of the curriculum. And we need to reverse those things. So we need to reward excellence. Great teachers, great principals, great schools, great districts. What are the 5 states that are leading the country in raising the bar for all children, closing achievement gaps? Florida, thanks to Governor Bush's leadership, Eric Smith is here, has done an extraordinary job there. What lessons can we learn? What districts are raising the bar for all children, closing achievement gaps? Let's start to spotlight success. Let's be much more flexible. I almost had to sue the Department of Education when I was in Chicago for the right to tutor my children after school. It was the most ludicrous fight I could have imagined. I had tens of thousands of children who wanted to go to school longer hours, wanted to work harder, knew they needed to catch up, and I had to get into this monumental battle, almost had to sue for the right to tutor my children. So how can we as Washington get out of the way and empower governors and great state school chief officers to do the hard work, have a high bar, but those good answers always going to come at the local level, not going to come from us in Washington, and we can provide much more flexibility there. Raising standards, we are almost there as a country. Again, that leadership from the states, 40 states now adopted college and career ready standards, been an absolute breakthrough. And then finally, this idea of a well-rounded curriculum is probably the biggest concern I've heard as I've traveled the country. And to me, this isn't just at the high school level, but it's first and second and third graders. Yes, reading and math are hugely important, but so is science and social studies and PE and art and music, foreign languages, environmental literacy, financial literacy. We need to make sure every single child has a world-class education so they can compete. So a tremendous amount of progress, lots of hard work ahead of us in this new year. Lots of folks will tell you all the reasons why things can't get done, but I'm absolutely convinced that in education, because it's so important for our children, because it's so important for our country, we have to put politics aside, we have to put ideology to the side, we have to do the right thing. I think there's a growing consensus of folks who are absolutely reform-minded, who are willing to challenge the status quo and do this the right way. And so for all the challenges, for all the sometimes craziness you hear coming out of Washington, I'm convinced education can be that thing that brings folks together to work in very different ways. If we do that, our legacy is not just going to be our children, it's going to be our children's children, their grandchildren. We have to reverse what's going on in this country. I think collectively working together, we have a unique opportunity to do that. I look forward to doing that work together. Thank you so much, and I'll take your questions.
Governor Bush, if you would join us on stage, we're going to have questions to both Secretary Duncan and Governor Bush. We're going to make a little change here. We have not heard a lot of questions from our lawmakers or our state chiefs, so I encourage those individuals to ask some questions. And while we're getting the stage set up, I'll start off a question. You both have alluded to it, Secretary Duncan, in your speech just now, and Governor Bush throughout the summit, but just in light of the recent elections and the changes that are happening in Congress, can you both share your thoughts on what do you think will happen with reauthorization and both parties working together for passage?
You want me to go first? Well, I hope that there's a consensus that we can move forward on, and I think there is. I don't view there's gradations of passion for reform, and there may be disagreements in the reform community about how far one needs to go, but there's a camp of reformers that are liberal and conservative, Republican, Democrat, Independent. There's ideology and party affiliation doesn't necessarily define those folks. And then there are people who, for different reasons, are against turning things upside down and changing and keeping the status quo as is. They're typically, the arguments are local control, and then on the other side, we don't trust, the other side is more federal involvement without accountability. So on Arne's left, there may be people that are opposed to reform. On Jeb's right, perhaps there's people that are opposed to reform for different reasons. And so you have two camps, and I think the way that you find common ground is listen to Arne Duncan speak a little bit, and where you hear about flexibility, then that eliminates some of the fear. And when you, I wanted to hear what I heard, which is that high standards, high expectations, accountability, all that stuff is important. And so the common ground comes by having a conversation, and you push the two groups that are not reform-minded further away from what I think is the mainstream. And the final thing I would say, and this is where the president has done a good job, and I hope he continues. In fact, I wish he accelerates this job, which is to make education a national priority, not a policy, not like a domestic policy thing where the Department of, you got 8 departments or whatever along near the Smithsonian. It's not a department, it's a national priority. It relates to our economic competitiveness. It relates to the social fabric of our country. It's how we define who we are going forward. And that's where presidential leadership is hugely important, and I give President Obama credit for that, but sometimes presidents get, they live the tyranny of the president like we all do, but their tyranny is a lot more complicated, and sometimes, you don't sense that there's that command focus that could happen. I think those three things could create a climate for reauthorization, and my broader hope, Arne, is that if that happened, that maybe then we could say, okay, well, this has now kind of happened. Maybe there's another policy area that has similar characteristics, and you start building on finding ways to solve problems before the larger issues that do have ideology attached to them are sorted out.
I'll just quickly add that if you look at this from a couple different lenses, whether you see this, as I do, as a civil rights issue of our generation, that this is a dividing line between the haves and have-nots more than race and class, it's educational opportunity. If you look at it from the economic standpoint, there's all kinds of data. McKinsey has a great report that talks about this, the dropout rate basically creating this permanent recession in our country. The third lens, which is pretty scary, is that I've done some work with a number of generals and retired generals. 75% of our young people today can't qualify for the military, either because they've dropped out of school, have a criminal record, or they're obese. And so whether it's civil rights, whether it's our future economic security, whether it's national security, whatever lens you view this, we have to get a lot better. And so we have to work together to lead the country where we need to go. And again, I think we have this extraordinary opportunity to do that.
One other thing, Patricia, that Secretary Duncan, it's amazing, this guy's got high energy. He's called every governor-elect. I'm not sure that any other cabinet secretary has done that. I mean, that's the exact right thing to do to build common ground, because there's a lot of new energy that will be coming from governors. Governors and state school officers are going to drive the reform agenda, and having a partnership, irrespective of party, is really the way to go. So kudos for continuing to do that. It's really important.
We're going to take some questions from the audience. How about?
Yeah, Eric Smith, Commissioner from Florida. And Arne, a great presentation. I love your enthusiasm, your energy, and your commitment, and the sense of urgency that comes across with your voice. It's valued by all the children in our great country. A little bit about reauthorization, because I do get very anxious that we're not moving ahead with reauthorization and getting the job done and redefining what the next step is going to look like and how it's going to be packaged. I did appreciate your comments about some of the thoughts you have regarding the components that you think are critical in that. Do you see a toughening up or a strengthening of the connection between the K-12 side and the post-secondary workforce side in that reauthorization process? And secondly, how much longer do we have to wait before we start seeing the debate begin?
So let me take the second part first, is that I think it's really important that Congress hears from state school chief officers, from superintendents, from union leaders, from parents, from the business community about the urgency to reauthorize. And frankly, if it's just me talking to them, that's Washington insider baseball. But where you see states raising standards now, in states where yesterday 80% of students look good, and today 40% of students are going to look good, there are lots of disincentives in the current law to do the right thing. We have to remove those disincentives. We have to focus much more on growth and gain and absolute test scores. And so I'm going to continue to push very hard. I do think there's real bipartisan support for this. But I think that sense of urgency in Congress, again, as the governor said, a million things, like the president, a million things coming at Congress. There are lots of reasons why why folks could say, well, it's not the right time. And so the more your voice is being heard, the more folks are speaking up, and let's do this in a common sense way, and let's do it with urgency. I would love to see us come right out in the new year and lead with this. And for better or worse, this may be the one issue that folks can work together on. As the governor said to me at some point, if we can do this and do it the right way, the country needs to behave in this way, and hopefully we can set an example through education. But I think your leadership there, I can't overstate how important it is that Congress hears from people that this, the status quo isn't good enough. The final piece that I talk about, again, leading the world in college graduates, one thing we're going to do with every state is look at their graduation rates for every single four-year university, every single community college, and help them map out over the next 10 years how much those numbers need to increase to again lead the world in college graduates. So we can set a target for every state. We can set a target for every higher education institution in those states. Clearly, they can't do it alone. We have to fix the pipeline. We have to send them a lot more students. We have to send them a lot more students who aren't so far behind. Again, it goes all the way down to early childhood education. But we're going to give every state a roadmap. And again, we'll measure each state of what they're doing to contribute to that ultimate goal.
Secretary Tony Bennett from Indiana. Again, thanks for your leadership. Thanks for being here today. Going to kind of go the opposite direction of Eric, assuming that maybe all this does get caught up in the minutia of Washington, D.C. Will the department establish some guiding principles for the waiver process? If so, what do you see those guiding principles being?
So that's something that we're prepared to look at. I will tell you, Tony, my total plan A is to get this thing done. And if we need to, I'm more than prepared and understand, again, the disincentives in the current structure for change. But if we're fixing this all through waivers, if we're doing this piecemeal, it doesn't get to the bigger picture. And I want the country to be, I don't want to just help a couple states. I want to help every state. I want to help every child. And I think our total collective effort should be on getting this done and getting this done together and getting it done early. If we have to do a plan B, we will, but I'm spending 99.9% of my time on let's go full steam early in the year and let's get this done.
Thank you again, Governor, for this opportunity. Really appreciate it. Hi, Mr. Secretary. My question is about our lowest achieving schools, and we are about to name our second round of schools in which we'll be intervening, thereby doubling the number of schools across the country in which we're needing to have really comprehensive intervention. And I'm concerned about our capacity to be able to do this effectively. And I'm wondering what the department can do to help us grow that ability across the country, both locally but also organizations that can help to provide this support to communities as we intervene in these schools.
That's a great question. First, I just want to thank the set of you actually sitting here, this new emerging group that Paul's helping lead, this Chiefs for Change, where I think, again, that so much of the leadership, Governor, has to come at the local level, can't come from us. And so you guys stepping up and really challenging the status quo. I just encourage you to continue to move together and to bring in other state school chief officers in this movement. That's a huge challenge. It's interesting, when we talk about low-performing schools in this country, you can make an argument that we should be much more ambitious, that we should be turning around 5,000 schools a year. And that would probably be the right thing to do, but Deb, to your point, we don't begin to have the capacity to do that well. And if we go into this and just perpetuate the status quo and perpetuate mediocrity, that will kill this thing. So we've actually pushed the country to start a little smaller, to start to build capacity. I was in Prince George's County today at a turnaround school. They have 4 schools, and they're turning around now. A lot more need. They're going to get to those, but trying to figure it out. I think where we can do, and this is one we're constantly thinking about, is how do we better define what our federal role is? How do we provide the flexibility? The one thing everybody's asking for is how do we better share best practices? How do we support technical assistance? How do we let folks talk about what's working and what's not? And I think the more we're becoming the repository for information, the more we're disseminating that in some really creative ways and using technology, I think there are huge lessons there. So right now, today, there are over 700 schools in this country being turned around. That is a staggering number when it used to be maybe 5 or 10 a year for the country. Some of these are going to go extraordinarily well. Some might not work. Some will be in the middle. The quicker we can learn what's working and what's not, look at those leading indicators, look at what models work where, and share that with you and share that with others, I think that's the kind of value that we as the Department of Education can bring to the country. And so we're going to work very hard to do that. And actually, I'll tip our hand a little bit relatively soon. We're going to come up with our first report on those 700 schools. And I think we can help you guys get the good information about what's working and not, and put you in a better position to drive this change and do it every single year. This has to be the business we're in as a country for the next 5, 10 years, pick a number.
Arne, why can't, in addition to that, why can't there be a focus on narrowing the achievement gap in the schools that aren't part of they're in the 95%? Yeah. Why not also focus on the bottom 25% of all schools in a more customized way? And why not use the entrepreneurial sector and the for-profit sector a little bit more in that effort? What's wrong with having business involvement that are creatively trying to focus on these targeted populations that may not just be in failing schools?
There's nothing that prohibits that. And again, to me, that shift from absolute results to growth and gain really gets at that, because we have many schools and many districts where the children are coming in way above average, and so they're at the 95th percentile, but they're stagnating. They're not going anywhere. But if you start looking at how much a student's improving each year, that levels the playing field. So whether it's the bottom 5% of schools or the top 5%, if they're just resting on those laurels, if those students aren't learning in the new accountability system, they'll be absolutely exposed. And so where you look at how much every school and every student is improving each year, I think it levels the playing field, and you can't just hide behind a more affluent community or a gifted school and not have those students move. But I couldn't, so we talk about closing these gaps with the rest of the world. We can't just bring up the bottom. We got to raise the top too. And I think this idea of looking at growth and gain gets us a long way down that path.
Another question?
Got to let Bill ask his question because I know what it's going to be.
Bill?
First of all, Secretary Duncan, thanks for being with us today and for what you are doing. We all know that the presidency is a bully pulpit, and the president can't do everything. But when he was running for office, he said he would be open to reforms that work. A month or so ago, he said on the Today Show that he wanted every child in America to have the same opportunities that he had and his children have who go to a very expensive private school here. You have said today that you want to make sure there is access and that children who don't have access to a quality education can walk with their feet. Today, we have 1.2 million empty urban school seats in the United States that are Catholic seats, just the Catholic seats alone. We have great demand, as Waiting for Superman has pointed out, to be in those seats. That's where the supply is. It seems to me we have erected our Berlin Wall in our country. Are you and the president prepared to take down that wall and become advocates for all forms of choice? Things are so bad. Let's put it all on the table. And let's help 1.2 million people kids can be in those schools by next year.
So a couple thoughts. It's a really fair question. I'll just give you one thing that I tried to do in Chicago that didn't work, and I'll give you sort of the bigger policy thing. I was a big fan of the Archdiocese schools. As our public schools got better, their enrollment went down. One thing I really challenged the Archdiocese schools to think about was actually becoming charter schools. And met with the Cardinal several times to push him to think about doing that. Couldn't quite convince him of doing it. Other religious-based schools did it. Jesuit schools became charter schools. And so I think there are creative ways there for folks to play in different ways if they're willing to think differently. But I was I understood their concerns and why it didn't happen, but I was actually frankly disappointed that I wasn't more successful there. I'll say bigger picture where I may differ a little bit with you philosophically. I have no problem at all, welcome, support, encourage, whether it's private business or philanthropy, really helping to scholarship students coming in. What I just think is, whether it's a federal government or state government or local government, I honestly think we have to be a lot more ambitious than that. And what's troubled me in the past is that folks have been content to save 1 or 2 or 3 children out of a failing school and leave the other 497 to drown. And this is, to me, what's changed. The game changer is this idea of turning around entire schools. And so when I have a failing school today, I don't want to just scholarship 3 children out and give them opportunity. I want to transform the opportunity structure for the entire school and to do it with a real sense of urgency. So where the private sector wants to play in scholarship, support that, no problem at all. But I think we as the federal government, we as a state government, we locally have to be talking about every single children, not just saving a few.
Well, not to have a debate, because I'm incredibly honored to have the Secretary here. To use the Florida experience, we have the most ambitious private school choice programs in the country, and we've had the greatest learning gains, and we are one of 3 states, I think, in the last decade that have narrowed the achievement gap. Yeah. And our public schools are better because we have private choices. It's not, I think that myth needs to be shattered, and everybody needs to be, if it's a national priority, if this is of national interest, I would hope that we would tear down, I'm not sure it's as dramatic as the Berlin Wall, Bill, that was very compelling. To bring everybody to the table that may not fit the box, you know, that is acceptable for everybody ought to be an option. If states want to do it, it seems like we would want to have federal partnership, at least at a minimum there. I agree with you, maybe the federal government shouldn't be like imposing this. I'm not a big fan of that, but it should be encouraging it.
Yeah. Well, it's a debate. Welcome to have the debate and have the conversation. May agree, may disagree, but I think putting everything on the table is exactly where we need to go.
All right. Good enough.
Mr. Secretary, I'm John Hupenthal, Superintendent-elect for Arizona. Your department's rigorous evaluations seem to suggest that for all the promise of technology, it hasn't materialized in some way that we can say, geez, this is the breakthrough, let's spread it across the country. And we in Arizona have been studying for 18 years technology. We feel like we have some ideas on how that breakthrough might take place. My question to you is, can you please talk a little bit about your perceptions of technology, where you think it's at, and potential partnerships to get that breakthrough?
So I agree, we are not there at scale in terms of that breakthrough. I would love to learn more about what you're doing. There are lots of interesting things going on in lots of places around the country. But I'll go back to where I started. I think honestly in education, we're scratching the surface. And I think other industries, again, whether it's social networking or on the, on the corporate side, are so far ahead of where we are. I think this is where, again, where education hasn't been nimble enough and hasn't moved fast enough. I do think this idea of turning crisis into opportunity presents an opportunity. We have this funding cliff. We have very tough budget times. I think technology can absolutely help to lead us where we need to go a couple ways. I think this idea of delivering educational knowledge, content to children 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, 9 months of the year makes no sense. Every child has a cell phone. Why aren't we delivering content 24/7? What are we doing to much better, again, some districts are doing this, to much better empower parents every single day to know what their children are learning and what they're not learning, and how can parents become much better engaged. Technology can really help to level the playing field, to drive up professional development for teachers, and really help them learn from one another and help them master their craft. So whether it's student learning, whether it's teacher ongoing professional development, whether it's empowering parents, lots of interesting things going on, nothing at scale yet. And my thought is that 5 years from now, education is going to look very, very different. It's going to be digital content, books, paper is going to disappear possibly, and I think we're on the cusp of that. And what we're really trying to drive is this national conversation. Given tough financial times, how do we become more productive? How do we become more efficient? I urge you to take a look at our national technology plan that we just put out. Karen Caters here has worked really, really hard. I think done a great job. And I think to get the much better results we need, technology is going to be not the answer, but a huge part of the answer going forward.
Mr. Secretary.
Sorry, one more thing, just sorry, quickly, obviously the virtual schools that you guys have done in Florida, I think 100,000 kids in virtual schools, rural communities, access to AP classes, access to marine biology, just some basic things that are happening that much more maybe on the higher ed side has to become the norm, not just in high school, but in elementary school as well.
Mr. Secretary, Tom Luna, State Superintendent from Idaho. Good to see you. I want to go back quickly to reauthorization and be a little bit more specific. No Child Left Behind is kind of like the Clint Eastwood movie, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And I think you identified some of the good things that have come from it, but it's definitely now becoming a stumbling block to future progress. When you look towards reauthorization, one of the things that we're looking for in states is more flexibility. Not less accountability, not more time, not necessarily even more money in this economy, because we understand the predicament the government's in, but more flexibility specifically with Title I dollars. You expressed your frustration that there were some things that you wanted to do in the Chicago School District, but thought you were going to have to sue the federal government. There's many things that we want to do in our states and in our districts that the law does not require or does not allow us to use Title I dollars for. What I'm getting to is a block grant approach where there's a high level of accountability, but a lot of flexibility on those Title I dollars, and I'm curious your opinion of that as we move towards reauthorization.
More than interested, and frankly, Title I is just part of the equation. It goes way beyond Title I. But I think the bargain that makes sense to me is this trade-off that you talk about. Much higher bar, greater accountability, college preparatory standards, but the trade-off for that is much greater flexibility. And I think that's a trade that we would be very smart to make. Hold folks accountable for results, but give them the room to move. And so Title I is a starting point, an important part of that conversation, but it's only a piece of it. And so that's the direction that we want to go. And again, providing that flexibility at the local level with a much higher bar. Where I don't want to compromise is flexibility with a low bar. What I don't want to compromise is flexibility for the status quo. But flexibility for a higher bar, that to me just makes tremendous sense.
I agree with that.
Mr. Secretary? At the back.
Well, first of all, but for foundation support, we wouldn't have this conference. So I'm very grateful for the foundation support that exists. And we have sensed that foundations are now getting much more aggressive in advocating more dramatic, dynamic reforms rather than funding programs and interesting ideas. they're now looking at funding efforts to change policy, which I think is really a groundbreaking concept and one that, that I think is very, very positive. What I would hope private philanthropy could do beyond the great work that's already being done is focus on scalability. So you all are incredibly involved and generous in the creation of the KIPP school in Jacksonville. Spectacular school, but KIPP wouldn't have come to Florida because our per student funding is close to the national average. Now, how can that be scalable, if you will, across the land, because KIPP is a spectacular model of success, if it only works in Newark, where Governor Christie tells us, you know, he's 25 grand or whatever per student, or if it works in the high-cost urban areas, but it can't work in Montana or Idaho or Florida or Texas or a lot of other places without massive subsidies, if you will, from philanthropy. So that is fantastic because those kids are going to get a great education. My hope is also that philanthropy would look at ways to bring more dynamic reforms in this era of a decade probably of flat or very moderate increases in government funding for schools in a way that creates whatever, if it's in Rhode Island, a great idea that makes it scalable, that can be embraced all across the country.
Mr. Secretary. If I could just add to it quickly. A couple quick thoughts. What I see happening around this country is this unprecedented move towards reform and innovation. So we funded a set of states through Race to the Top. 46 states put together phenomenal blueprints for reform that just simply didn't exist before. There are a lot of states that we would love to have funded that we just didn't have the money. We just ran out of money. They have plans. A lot of states are moving without our money. Help them get where they're trying to go. Our I3 initiative, the Invest in Innovation Fund, we had 49 applicants we were lucky enough to fund. We had 1,700 applicants. We have an online registry of all the phenomenal work going on at that local level that we would love to have invested in, that we'd love to see private philanthropy step in. On that one, private philanthropy matched us 20%, $130 million, phenomenal. The Promised Neighborhoods Initiative, trying to replicate some of Jeffrey Canada's great work, 300 applicants. We funded 20 planning grants. So never before do we have, again, states, districts, community level, wherever you want to play, never before has there been so much good work, so much commitment to reform and innovation. We're scratching the surface in our resources to fund the great stuff that's out there. Having private philanthropy encourage these folks to keep moving, don't stop, to put their plans into action. We have to keep this momentum going. And I'm just heartbroken that we couldn't fund more of the good stuff out there. That's what we have to keep doing ourselves. We can't do it alone. You guys got to help partner with us.
We're going to take one last audience question from the gentleman in the back there.
Mr. Secretary, Sergeant George Alvarez and Marcel. As you just mentioned, there's been considerable momentum created in the first 2 years of your administration. You've got a number of new leaders, both at the state level, but also at the local level. You've got new superintendents coming in cities like New York, Chicago, Newark, DC. But in 2011, we're not going to have the benefit of new stimulus money. And these new leaders won't have been part of the original momentum that's been created. So there may be a tendency to rest on the laurels and momentum of what you've created in the first 2 years. As you look at 2011 and you look at this new leadership, what will be your priorities, not just to maintain the momentum that you've created, but actually build and accelerate it?
So, I mean, just to start with, again, we can't begin to rest on laurels. We haven't done anything yet. I mean, the hard work is ahead of us. So, I mean, I like to think we've laid a bit of a foundation. But has the dropout rate moved dramatically? Of course not. Have we dramatically increased college graduation rates? Of course not. And so this is all about implementation, execution, and making real what we're talking about at the individual classroom level. And so there's a huge opportunity with, again, you take any of those cities, New York, DC, Chicago, wherever, none of those places is the graduation rate anywhere near where it needs to be. Nowhere is the dropout rate as low as it needs to be. Real progress in those places, but absolutely unfinished. And so I think there's an opportunity for that new crop of talent to come in and take it to the next level. I'll give you an example right here in DC. I was a big fan of Michelle Rhee, sorry to see her go. Let me tell you, Kaya Henderson is a dynamic leader. And I think you're going to see things here continue to improve because of her courage and because of her leadership. And so I actually don't worry about folks sort of saying we got it made. I'm not hearing that. And we need to support this next generation of superintendents as they move forward and sort of put in place at the school level, at the classroom level, which is where the rubber meets the road, the kinds of changes that we're talking about.
Mr. Secretary, Governor Bush, any final thoughts to our audience before I close the program?
I am incredibly grateful for the Secretary coming, and I hope you sense that there's a lot of room for common ground, and all across the country there's a real interest in making this a national priority and making reform front and center in every nook and cranny in the country, and we appreciate your leadership. We really do.
Yeah, if we could please give the governor a huge round of applause for bringing us all together. These conversations are so important, and your leadership and your moral leadership on this, I think, is hugely important as we move forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you so much.
When we started the summit, we watched a video trailer of the film Waiting for Superman, a film that makes the point about where a student is zoned or what type of teacher is assigned to them can dictate their future success. I want to let you all know, you are elected officials or appointed individuals that represent 34 states in this country. If you add up the number of students who have to live under the policies that you pass, that's 38 million students who you are their representatives who are here today. 75% of all the students in America live under your policies. So when you leave this summit and you go into your next legislative session or your next proposed budget to the legislature, think about those 75% of the students in this country, and I urge you to be impatient, be courageous, and be their Superman. And hope to see you in San Francisco next year. Have a good day.